Hey geeks, welcome to another exciting episode of Rockin The Code World with dotNetDave. I'm David McCarter. I'm glad you're all here. And I always talk about weather for some reason at the top of the show, and I think summer is here. I think we've missed spring in San Diego, and summer is here already. It was yesterday, it was 82 degrees. Today it's going to be close to that, and I think we just skipped spring because we've had such a cold past 5 months, and so anyway, I'm glad you're all here. We have a great guest on today, Isaac Levin. He's a advocate at Amazon Web Services, and that's great because last week we had MVP from Azure on, so you get best of both worlds here on CSharpCorner. I was going to say my show name, and so what have you guys been up to this past week? You know, I haven't told Simon yet, but I'm already thinking about season 4 of Rockin The Code World, and I've already come up with a new logo already. I know I'm way ahead, but that's what I do when I'm bored and I get an idea. I go, let me try this and see if it comes out okay. And because when I come up with stuff like this, I try to incorporate music and tech and my love of graphics and graphic arts, and so it takes me a little while to come up with things sometimes, but maybe I'll show it to you next week. And I thought about, if anybody can tell me where I got my inspiration, I'll give away a copy of my book, my code performance book. So stay tuned for the next episode. It's not next week, it's next month. So also the MVP Summit, the first in-person MVP Summit happened this week in Seattle, as usual. It was the first time since COVID hit. Unfortunately, I couldn't go because I was out of work so much last year. And, when you go to the MVP Summit, it's basically, I can't work for, a week. So I lose all that income. So hopefully I'll go next year. I hope everybody who did go had a great time, and I missed you all. That's my favorite part of going to the MVP Summit, is seeing all my friends from around the world and hanging out with you and talking with you and everything. And I'm kind of sad I couldn't go and experience that this year, but next year for sure. All right, let's get going so we can bring Isaac on. If you don't know, you know now. The CSharpCorner Code Quality Conference is June 2nd this year. Simon and I were just talking about it before the show, and I hope you're excited. We've had 90,000 people watch the past 2 conferences, and so I think that's a pretty dang good number, if you ask me, for a one-day conference. And so we're planning already for this year. We're accepting papers right now until the middle of next month. So if you want to participate, I really want you to participate. I don't want to speak at this conference because I want to give you a chance to speak about what you're passionate about code quality and in code performance in your code and in your apps. And so I want you to speak. I'm just going to be the host and kind of keep you guys on track, and so we can have another great conference just about code quality, because I think we all need conferences like this. I wish this was like a week-long conference, to tell you the truth, but I'll settle for one day. Also, you all hopefully know that my latest copy of my latest edition of my coding performance book is out. Gosh, I'm getting all mixed up this morning, Saturday. And I hope you go pick up a copy. I worked really, really hard on this book. I learned a lot writing this book, and if I learned a lot, hopefully you will too. So I hope you go pick up a copy of that. Also, I released the Spargin Dev Tool. I hope you go check that out. I need some feedback. I did get some feedback this week. I need to get back to this weekend. But the Spargin Dev Tool is like the third version of this app that quickly backs up all of your source code, automatically figures out where it all is and quickly backs it up. Even with the turbo mode, I use the turbo mode multiple times a day, and it backs up, the files I've been working on in just like 2 seconds. And so I use that all throughout the day. And then once a day, I use the clean, usually, unless I'm having issues with Visual Studio, which cleans out all the cached and temp files that Visual Studio, SQL Server, and all kinds of other applications leave around on your computer, which can cause problems, coding. And so that's why it's there. And I'm going to add more features. So I hope you go check it out. And if you do check it out, please send me some feedback. I want to know how it's working for you, especially if you have issues. I have a new article out on CSharpCorner. This one's about regular expressions. So it's the fastest way in .NET 7 you can do regular expressions. So I hope you go check that out and incorporate that into your code, because we all use regular expressions. I think we don't use them enough because we don't like writing the regular expression syntax, and it's very convoluted, and the performance is not always great. But with .NET 7, we can really get it down to the fastest we can. And if you read the article, I actually use ChatGPT to write my regular expressions now, and it does a really good job. I mean, so far, 100% perfect. So I think it's pretty cool. All right. .NET News, .NET Previews, .NET 7, EF7, ASP.NET Core, and Maui RC3. So that's the big .NET News I could find this week, besides the MVP Summit. And so if you're if you want to get on the latest of that, I definitely recommend checking that out. All right, let's bring on Isaac. Isaac is a lead developer advocate at Amazon Web Services, as well as a Microsoft MVP. He has over 10 years of experience working as a developer for the web, mostly in Microsoft ecosystem. Outside of work, he hosts a podcast called Coffee and Open Source, where he interviews folks from across the tech industry, as well as build open source projects like PresentLight, and GitHub Tracker, Stat Tracker. Maybe we can talk to him about that. It sounds interesting. He lives outside of Seattle, and he likes to wind down from work with his wife and 2 sons. So welcome, Isaac.
Dave, I'm very excited to be here. First off, music is fire to begin this. So I'm literally here, like, I'm drumming it out. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. I'm excited to talk. Like, it's about 10 a.m. My time on a Saturday. I have coffee. I mean, I'm looking forward to it. But I want to make one comment. We're talking about how like the weather in San Diego, right? Like, we all know that San Diego does not have weather. Like,
I know.
Like, what is the joke? The easiest job in the world is a weather
San Diego weatherman.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to it.
While you're joking about our weather, one of my favorite comedians of all time is Louis Black.
Oh yeah, have you seen him live?
I have. I've seen him twice.
So good. I've seen him before too. He's great.
And each time, the first thing he says is something about our weather. And so the last time I saw him, he comes out on stage, and it just so happened that the entire country had crappy weather, except for us, as usual, right? And so he comes out, he goes, and he basically says what you just said. He goes, "What the F do you weather people do? You guys," and he said something that I always remember. He goes, "You guys live in a effing weather bubble."
Yeah. I mean, no one is, and if folks don't know who Louis Black is, he used to be on The Daily Show, which is a show on Comedy Central. If you have kids, you might recognize him from he was the voice of Anger in the Pixar movie Inside Out. So if you have kids and you've seen Inside Out, which is the Pixar movie about feelings, he's Anger, and I think that he's like the perfect candidate for like, he has this ability. And I've met him, like I did like a meet and greet with him, and he's very calm, very cordial. The stage persona is just bubbling, screaming, yelling. It's
the angry like, old man.
It's literally chef's kiss, right? Like
it's awesome, and I love seeing him live. Is the best, right? And I mean, I see him every chance I get on TV, but seeing him live is great. I love live comedy shows, especially the bigger ones, like when he's on at a theater or something like that, right?
Yep.
Where you don't have the 2-drink minimum.
Sure.
I don't know if everybody in the world knows, but here in America, if you go see a comedy show at a small club, there's a 2-drink minimum that you have to do. And actually, I was watching something on Netflix this weekend, and the comic said something, to the guy in the front row. And another thing is, you never sit in the front row at a small show.
Sure.
And he was making, he goes, "Why do you have 2 drinks?" He goes, "Well, that's the minimum." And he goes, "Oh yeah, I forgot."
Yeah. No, it is definitely interesting, like the idea, and I understand why. Like, if you're going to perform at a venue, like the number one stream of revenue for any venue is food and beverage, right?
Alcohol.
So
yeah.
So like, I mean, I don't know if you follow baseball, but I'm a big baseball fan, and like baseball recently has introduced something to make games faster.
Yeah.
And the first thing that I realized was like, oh, like these stadiums are going to lose millions of dollars a year on beer because the games are like 20 to 30 minutes shorter now. So we'll see how that ends up happening. Yeah, it's very strange.
I'm sure they'll find a way to.
Oh yeah, my wife and I went to a baseball game last night, and the game was over in a little bit over like 2 hours and 10 minutes is how long the game was. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's short.
Yeah. Like I live outside Seattle. So I live like a 30-minute drive without traffic. So I got home, like I went to a baseball game that started at 7 and I got home like right at 10 o'clock, which is absolutely absurd. If anybody here is a baseball fan or is familiar with baseball, like games are usually 3+ hours and then you got to get out with traffic and everything.
Yeah.
So,
but
yeah.
Your team's the Mariners, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I got to see them once long time ago when I was in the Navy. I actually caught like a foul ball or something.
Oh, nice.
The game I went to, but
yeah. Do you like baseball? Do you like the Padres? I'm guessing.
I do.
Somewhat,
okay. Well, they usually always lose anyway, so
Well, yeah.
I did see them. I did see them at their first World Series game here back in the late '90s. I did see that. So I got to go to a World Series game, which was kind of on my bucket list.
I've never been, but I've heard the stadium is absolutely perfection. So like the stadium that's right there in downtown San Diego.
The new one. Yeah, I went when it was the old one, but yeah, the new one is a more like your stadium, right? You have a pretty cool baseball stadium, and it's similar to yours. It's not like a multi-use stadium like the old one was.
Yeah, the old one is like what Qualcomm was that? What
Qualcomm
it used to be called?
Yeah.
Does that even exist anymore, or did it get blown up?
I think they're finally getting rid of it and putting something out. I don't keep track of what's going on there anymore because we don't have any really major sports teams anymore, except for the Padres. And so
it's disappointing the Chargers moved. Like, I mean, I don't know, like moving teams around. I
don't think they should be able to do that.
Well, I'm a basketball fan, or at least I used to be, because we used to have an NBA team in Seattle, and that team got taken away from us, and then they were good immediately after, right? For a couple of years. But anyway, now we have a hockey team, and I think the basketball team will come eventually. But right now, it's this town is very much a football town, a baseball town. We have the hockey team, which they're in the playoffs this year, and we're oddly enough like a very big soccer town. Like the soccer stadium is consistently full. And we have a pretty vibrant fan base there for if you like soccer or football.
Yeah, at one of the MVP summits a while ago, they used to rent out the stadiums, for the big party, right? And one year, they had soccer players there, so we could kick balls with them, and the cheerleaders. And I gravitated towards the cheerleaders, but
So Microsoft used to do that. I used to work at Microsoft, and they used to do that a lot for their internal events too, where they would rent out the Seahawks stadium and you can go and kick field goals or whatever. And that was always fun seeing people with like dress shoes try to kick field goals and fall down, like
or
really
geeks,
funny.
software engineers try to kick the field goal.
Yeah.
We're not that great at sports, I don't think.
I think that there is a pretty large swath of us that we just like to be around computers. But to affect, like for you, like some of us are very creative. Like we love the arts, we love music, we love drawing and painting and sculpting, and
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like, and then obviously, for some reason I've seen a lot of like software developers that are really big into like weightlifting, which is very
Oh,
strange to me. But like, I
Simon's
have a
getting into that. Simon's getting
yeah,
into weightlift,
yeah, yeah.
pumping up those muscles.
Got to get big. Got to get swole. You were saying
So,
something. I interrupted you.
yeah, speaking of music, you just bought a new amplifier.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So, first off, like I want to preface this. I am not at the level of Dave McCarr as a musician. Like these guitars that I have on my wall, they're art. I like to play
Yeah,
them every now
yeah.
and then, but they're art. But yeah, I picked up. I don't know if you've heard of it. I picked up a new practice amp. It's called a Spark amp.
I've
So
heard of it. Yeah.
by Positive Grid, yeah. So it's cool because it's all app based. So it has like knobs. It has some
Mhm.
tactile stuff on the amp itself, but you can control the entire amp on your phone.
Yeah.
So like I have like those blue. They're not Bluetooth, but they're basically like receiver transmitters.
Mhm. Yeah.
So like I plug into my guitar, plug into the amp, and I could be anywhere within 25, 30 feet of the amp, and I can change all of the different presets and add gain and all of that. So it's pretty cool. It's a cool amp. I'm not promoting it. I'm not getting paid by them, but like I remember, so I watched Brady's episode a couple of days ago, Brady Gassers, and you guys were geeking about music, and I was like, oh man, I want to geek about music for like a few minutes at least.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
there we go, geeking about music.
Yeah.
But as you can tell, I like Stratocasters. You like Line 6 guitars, so
yeah. I was just going to bring up all of my gear is Line 6 pretty much.
Yep.
I mean,
yeah,
I have other guitars too. Like I have a Les Paul. I have a Strat. I have an Ibanez Strat copy. I have a 1962 Gibson SG, which is worth I think close to $7,000 now. I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And so and all of my amps except for my bass amp, because Line 6 doesn't make bass amps anymore, are all Line 6. Yeah.
How heavy is that SG, by the way? So like every time I picked up an SG, it feels like it has like gold bricks inside the body of the guitar.
No, it's so light.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like I played an SG at like a Guitar Center or whatever one of these times, and I mean, obvious in comparison, like I play like the lightest guitar basically you can get, right?
Yeah.
Like our Ibanez is pretty light too, but Strats are really, really light. And I remember just picking up the SG, and I felt like I couldn't hold it with one hand. Like,
well, see, it's the total opposite for me. It's too light for me, and even when Les Paul designed that guitar, Gibson told him it will never sell because it's too light. That's what they said, and look at Angus Young made it popular, right? Of AC/DC.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
but they said it would never sell. And it did. And so for me, being 6'4", and 200 pounds, it's too little and too light for me. So I like playing it, but I like the sound and everything, but I don't like playing it because it's too light for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you deal with stuff like Les Pauls and even some Strats, they're heavy. Those are the heavy guitars. Yeah.
Well, some of the I think Gibson in general makes a very heavy guitar. Like like the old, like if you ever play like an old Les Paul, like it just has weight to it. And I think that's kind of the goal, right? Like you want to have some resonance and some really deep body sounds, right?
Right. You have that good wood, you get that really good resonance, you get the really good warm sound when you have wood like that, as opposed to the cheaper wood, and even the cheaper guitars, which are just basically just plywood, which it's silly to me.
Well, like, so this guitar here, so I bought a kit. Like I bought one of those kits on Amazon because my wife she's into all sorts of DIY hobbies, and she was getting into like paint pouring, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but it's like you put a bunch of acrylic paint into a bucket and then you just dip stuff into it. So she wanted to do it with a guitar. So I'm like, okay, well, I mean, I'll always get a new guitar, even if it's like $100. So bought that, and so I can grab it if you want, but like it's like this cool, like really blue, black, gray design. And she made that. Honestly, the guitar kind of plays like shit, but but again, it's art. So
if you want to grab it, I'll tell you about
hold on.
Well, while he's doing that, sorry, we're geeking. Well, I'll go back to tech, everybody, as soon as we're done talking about his guitar. But You know, it's Simon will know if you have somebody that likes music on the show, we're going to end up talking about music for a while. But what I want to tell you is I just saw an ad for, Steve Vai is one of my, oh, wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, so like
Yeah.
my wife literally, like, you hold it up here and then you just dip it. You just dip it into a bucket of paint, and
That's how you
it's
do
kind of,
it? Yeah.
yeah. So she did that, and at the time, I'm getting all blurry. At the time I was working at Microsoft and I was working on Azure, and I was like, "Can you make it like Azure sort of colors?" And she's like, "Yeah." So, and she did that, and I was so happy with it. I put it in my office, in the wall, on the wall in my office at Microsoft, and people would come by and they're like, "Where did you buy that guitar?" I'm like, "My wife made it. She
Wow.
made it." So
Well, if
anyway,
I ever come
yeah.
up there, I want to play it. But Steve
No,
Vai
no, you
is
don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. No, you
well,
don't.
I mean, just to take a picture with it, right?
Yeah, sure.
But Steve Vai is coming out with a guitar that looks a brand new model of his guitar that looks very much like that. And I was looking at it
Yeah.
yesterday. I was going, how they do that? And so yeah.
Yeah, so I
Anyway,
mean, there's a bunch of
let's
ways you can do it, but yeah,
yeah.
like the paint pouring is kind of a cool little thing. Like,
I
and
have
my
to look
wife's done,
into
like,
that.
yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay. Well, before I get hate mail, we're just talking about music.
Oh, yeah,
Let's
yeah.
let's talk about tech. So you wanted to talk
Sure.
about .NET, soft skills, and open source. Where do you
Yeah,
want
of
to start?
course. Yeah, we can talk about anything really. I mean, so you talked about the MVP summit.
Yeah.
So I live in the area and I'm an MVP, so I went and I was
Mhm.
fortunate enough to go. I'm obviously not going to talk about the stuff that I saw because I enjoy being an MVP. Um, but I mean, it's really awesome, I think, to what you were saying, to get back and seeing a lot of our friends, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're on the speaker circuit, I'm on the speaker circuit, and I think in the last year or so, like, a lot of conference organizers, a lot of community activities have started to get groundswell from their community saying we want to be back in person, and I think it's
Mhm.
great.
Yeah.
And shamelessly plug, but like, one of the things that AWS, the company that I work at, is trying to do is help foster that coming back to person
Mm.
sort of experience,
Yeah.
right? So like, one of my charters at AWS is sponsoring third-party events.
Right.
So like, we've sponsored a bunch of third-party events this year already. Most of them in the .NET heavy conferences. So like, if you're a .NET developer, you might have heard of like NDC, so like Norwegian
Mhm.
Developers Conference, or
Mhm.
Svedug, which is a really, really great conference in Sweden, put on by some MVPs, and a bunch of
Yeah.
other conferences. And like, we're going to sponsor conferences throughout the year. And one, because I think it's great to get back out there. And I think two, and this kind of might go into another area of our conversation, but like, I think it's fair to say that it's always great to bring awareness of AWS to .NET developers, because
Mhm.
.NET developers might not be thinking about AWS as immediately when they think about .NET apps, right?
Right.
They might be thinking of some other option. And I think it's really, really important to give folks options, or at least let them know about the options.
Mhm.
So, it's whether me speaking out at events or us being, sponsoring an event and having a booth where we can talk about stuff with folks. I've been really happy with the conversations that, we've started to have in the community, especially around .NET AWS.
Yeah. I've used both.
Yep.
Most of my cloud experience that I've been paid for, though, has been in AWS, because at
Sure.
least in this part of the country, down here, it's that's where most companies lean. It's
Yep.
really hard for me to find any company here that's using Azure.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because I do want to use it more, and get paid for it, but
Yeah,
I
sure.
just can't find companies that are using it. So, that gets me into, if you want to be more employable, you should learn both, right?
Yeah.
I know, you might think Azure is the greatest thing in the world, but there are other ones out there, and that makes you more employable. It's kind of like when .NET first came out. We only had a couple languages, but people would ask me, even when I was teaching at the university, which one should we learn? I go, well, learn the one
Yeah.
is easiest for you first, and then learn the other one, right?
Yeah.
Because they will make you twice as more employable if you do
Yeah.
something like that.
And I think too, especially, and this might be something that you can speak to as somebody who works in both of them, to an extent. And to be honest, like, when I joined AWS, I didn't have a ton of AWS experience.
Mm,
Obviously, I came from Microsoft, so
mm.
you know what I was working on a
Yeah.
lot there. Um, But like, so the way that you have to think about building apps in these different clouds, you not even just AWS and Azure, but also GCP or Oracle Cloud or IBM or Tanzu or whatever, right? Like the way that you think about building applications is substantially different per cloud provider. It's not
Yes.
like, that's why I always am always, when people talk about hybrid cloud, like I get like, oh, okay, so like you want to do like the same thing kind of like two different ways.
Mhm.
And that's not a bad thing. It's good to have like those options and to be well versed in the cloud, because like for instance in AWS land, and you can speak to this because you've done it too, like we follow like this least privileged security model. So
Mhm.
like if you want to get access to something, you have to deliberately
Yeah.
specify that access.
Right.
It's not like in other clouds where it's like, oh, I have a key and a secret and I can just pass that key and secret everywhere I want and I can connect to whatever I want from it. I can
Yeah.
connect from my local machine, I can do whatever. In AWS it's a bit more deliberate. Like you say, I want this AWS Lambda function to be able to read write to this DynamoDB table storage, right? Like, and I think that it's good and or bad. I think that it's great because there's less risk of getting exposed in some particular capacity, but then it's a different way to go about things. Because if we're .NET developers, we're very accustomed to connection strings.
Yes.
We're very accustomed to configuration settings and just throwing all of our stuff in there.
Putting it
And
in code.
yeah, putting in code, check it in to GitHub repositories. At least GitHub now does a really good job of saying, hey, don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you kind of have to retrain your brain on how to do some of these like core, like primitive things that we were first taught when we first started building apps, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's good to always be learning. I'm very a big advocate of always learning, but it
Yeah.
is challenging going
Yeah.
from one cloud to the other. So, one of my goals is to kind of demystify a lot of things, because I have this background in both now. I can say, okay, so you might be familiar with something like this. Think about it from this approach.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's like whether that's speaking at events or creating content or speaking to folks out in the community, like it's funny how many people have like this pre-built assumptions about AWS,
Mhm.
and they're immediately kind of like, I guess those opinions aren't justified.
Mm.
Like AWS is like basically VMs in the cloud, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a big thing that folks talk about a lot. It's like, no, like, look at these services, like look at these capabilities that we have. And I can talk about some of them if you're interested, but like
Yeah.
it's very interesting when you show folks some of the stuff. They're like, oh, I didn't even know that sort of thing existed, right? Which
Yeah.
is always kind
Yeah.
of interesting and fun.
Well, I actually spent better part of 2.5 years at a contract I was working on last year with Verizon,
Hmm.
trying to teach them what the heck the cloud is, because they thought,
Yeah.
I'm serious, they thought exactly what you just said. They
Yep.
said, well, you have VMs. What more do you need? I'm,
Yeah.
I'm talking to the tech people going, that's not the cloud. Virtual
Yeah.
machines is not the cloud. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. Yeah, and I think both of us can go on a mini rant about this particular
yeah,
topic. So, I mean, maybe we should just kind of curb it to like a minute. But I
yeah.
think that one of the big things I think that people want to do initially is because they're told the cloud is less expensive than hosting your own servers on
Mhm,
premise,
mhm,
right? Or in
mhm.
some a co-locate storage. Um, that's great. So like the lift and shift approach is cool. Like you take your VMs on-prem and you put them in the cloud.
Right.
But then eventually you have to modernize, or like the cloud is far more expensive than on-prem in a lot of in a lot of capacities, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like if you just have VMs that you're not optimizing those VMs, you're not um making sure that you're just paying for the compute without really thinking like, okay, my web server is always like at 30% capacity. That's
Mhm.
bad. That's very bad,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like you're paying for capacity you don't need.
right.
So like a lot of those, and I'm glad there's folks like you out in the world that are kind of talking about cloud fundamentals and like, hey, maybe this approach, like this lift and shift approach, isn't for you. Like I'm very much more of the fact, like let's modernize. Let's make sure that you're building apps that actually work effectively in the cloud.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're going to run into the situation where you knock at my door and you're like, why is my bill so high? And I'm like, well, are you trying to optimize? And there's
Yeah.
tons of companies and tons of folks out there that are working on cloud optimization stuff. And that's awesome.
Mhm.
Because I think if it's all about bringing business value, and if
Yeah.
business value is getting hurt because you're spending too much money for something you don't need, like you need to kind of reprioritize.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have another story, but let's move off that.
Sure.
But I do have a question for you, because
Yeah, of course.
this is a question that keeps coming up. And since I have somebody who's been working on both ecosystems,
Yeah.
right? You're a really good person to ask.
Sure.
And I have never been able to have a good answer for this. So this is why I'm going to ask you.
Well,
So
you're not going to get
here's
one probably from me. So
so here's the scenario. So
sure.
a
Sure.
lot of the hesitancy. So let me back up a little bit.
Yeah.
So even when I was a beginner software engineer, I worked at a company just literally up the street from where I live now. That's why I live here. And and I learned then that you should always use the right tool for the job, right?
Sure.
You know, and I think I said this last week. When you work at a company and they say we will only use C#, that's not a good statement to me, right?
Sure.
You should always use the right tool that gets you there the best and delivers the best for your customers, right?
Yeah, just
So
not VB.
yeah.
I joke. Sorry, keep going.
That's okay. So that's what I've always believed. And so now that we have, multiple clouds, and we have so many of them now, there's only two really big players, if you ask me. But one of the hesitancies I see companies not doing that statement, like they will say, we will only use AWS, we will only use Azure, as opposed to saying, well, we could use a hybrid of both, right?
Yeah.
But so my curiosity is, why don't people do that? But the other part of that question is people ask me, okay, they don't want to be tied to a cloud provider, so how do we do that, right? And my only answer to them, I'll tell you, is that you should code the way I teach people to code, and not put most code into the microservices and stuff like that. They should be in reusable DLLs that you could use with any cloud system, right? And you should not, abandon the architecture patterns we've been doing forever, and that's my only solution. So do you know of anything out there that kind of allows you to create a framework that would work on both, right? And do you know any companies that use both?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say actual company names, but like I think a lot of I think a lot of there are a lot of companies specifically that have .NET services or .NET applications that run in both clouds. But I just have like a general like overall thought that I have around cloud in general that is a bit, I guess it's spicy, if depending on who I work for, who I've worked for in the past. So I think the cloud is a commodity. Like, honestly, like you want serverless compute, you want VMs, you want database, you want whatever, you want containers, you want AI. Like it goes to a point where every cloud has service that does X, right? The real differentiator between the clouds is what I was talking about earlier. If the concepts and some of the approaches, the implementations of those products make more sense for you from a business value perspective. And that includes cost. Like at the end of the day, everybody, like if you go and talk to 99% of all customers, most of them care about cost.
Right.
And then 1% care about differentiating. Right. So at the end of the day, like if you're choosing services and solutions that are more cost effective than others, you're probably going to be in that cloud. To your point about like running app X, like let's just take like a Blazor application, right? With a web front end, right? Like you can host that in like 18 different services across all the different cloud providers, right? It's just a web app, right?
Right.
I think that, and to an extent, like if your CI and CD is effective, you could easily go from service A in cloud X to service B in cloud Y, right? You probably could. There is a bit of hoops you have to jump through, and maybe, like I said earlier, like changing some of the configurations and things like that. I think and obviously, like, isn't that like the whole point of Kubernetes? Like, if you're on Kubernetes, you can, you can have Kubernetes deployed to EKS, or you can have Kubernetes, which is Elastic Cloud Kubernetes Service, which is Amazon's Kubernetes, or you can deploy it to Kubernetes in an environment, or you can deploy it here. But again, Kubernetes is like the largest hammer for everything, right? I don't think in my opinion, most customers probably don't need all of the value that you get from Kubernetes. If you're building like a lot of business applications or whatever, please don't use Kubernetes. Like if you have like 5 users, like you don't need Kubernetes. Anyway, I'm going to stop that rant. But to your point about like, is there an easy way to get from one cloud to the other? I think it really depends not on how you host your apps, but the underlying services that you're taking into account. Like if you, for instance, are using, like for instance, Amazon Recognition, which is one of our AI-based services. So like building something like that in another cloud would not be easy. But the web app piece, the web app is easy. Let's honest. Like if you host your web app in some IIS service or some Apache-based service, like that's easy. Like it's just another deployment endpoint.
Right.
The real challenge is like the auxiliary services that your app depends upon.
Right. The microservices and the storage and all that
storage
stuff,
or database or
the eventing and the queuing.
Exactly. Right. So I think that's the real hard part. Is getting from those services to other services. And I've seen like, there are some third-party tools that like, oh, this is an abstraction on top of these messaging systems in different cloud providers. So if you use that, like you change the underlying configuration, but then you're paying for some other vendor to do stuff for you, which is a problem, right? But I think there's always this healthy balance of like, do I pay for something that makes me get to where I want to faster, or do I build it myself with running the risk of potentially having to change in the future, maintain that in the future? And that's a balance that I think every business needs to have. If you're small, I mean, I think building something yourself is very problematic. Like it's much better to get something off the shelf. But I mean, like, let's be honest, like these, SaaS providers that kind of do these abstractions across multiple clouds, like they understand that they bring a ton of value to customers. So they don't charge like that. They definitely charge as like, I'm not going to call out particular names, but like if you're in the observability space, for instance, there's like 4 or 5 like big vendors in the observability space that are not a cloud provider, and they're not cheap, right? Because they understand like, oh, like if I can send all of my AWS logs, all of my on-prem logs, all of my other cloud logs to one singular service, and then get that, I hate this phrase, single pane of glass across all of my stuff, like that's very valuable. So I'm going to charge like $1 million a year for it. So, I mean, it's hard. I don't know if I really answered your question, but I think that there is a healthy.
You did.
Yeah, there's there's a healthy decision tree that you have to go through.
Yeah, I just want to, because I've talked to multiple companies about their hesitancy of moving to the cloud, and each company said it's because they don't want to be tied to a specific cloud provider. So they're still doing on premise, and their idea is not to change. When people say like, I don't want vendor lock-in, I understand the underlying reasoning. Like if vendor X decided to like double or triple my rates, like I want to be able to get out of that. I totally respect that. Right. But in all practicality, the vendor, their whole business model is around you staying. So are they going to make decisions that are going to make it easier for customers to want to leave? Like that's something that I've always kind of been like very wary about when people talk about vendor lock-in. It's real, don't get me wrong. But vendors want you to stay. So they're going to give you good reason to stay. So like, I mean, there is like this weird balance, because I mean, if you worked for a cloud provider and then all of a sudden you like quadrupled everybody's bill, you would no longer be a cloud provider because you'd go out of business almost immediately. Right. That doesn't mean that companies don't raise their rates on stuff because things change. But like you have to continue to bring value, either financially or in an innovation standpoint, that's really going to make customers want to stay. And that's what really vendor lock-in is that it's almost too good to leave. Not it's too bad to leave. That's my approach to it. And I think some people might think that's, I don't know, dodging a question or dodging a thought, but it's true. Like if you are on a cloud and you're happy, does vendor lock-in really matter? Right.
Yeah. So anyway.
So I always forget to do this, but Simon did do a thing about it on the screen, that if anybody's got some last minute questions, because we don't have too much time left, please put them in the chat and we'll answer them for you. So, I heard a statement once that I kind of wanted to ask you, since you've been on both sides of this equation. And that is, we all know there's no such thing as 100% uptime, right? It doesn't really exist at this point. I mean, you can get pretty dang close, but there's always a chance, that AWS is going to hiccup and Netflix is going to go down. It's happened, right? And so I heard once that you should basically have a duplicate on 2 different complete cloud providers. And have you heard of any company that did that? Because I just think that's monumentally
I've heard of it, but I've never actually seen it in practice. I think that there makes sense if you have some services that don't have a lot. Like I think it goes back to my statement about like dependencies. If you have services that don't have a lot of external dependencies, I think you can definitely replicate them across the clouds and it not be super expensive. But like if you have like data lakes on multiple cloud providers, if you have AI or ML models that are being built constantly on like you're going to spend so much money.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of sense, yes, like clouds do go down. Like no one, like honestly, on-prem goes down all the time too. Like I worked at a company where a guy dropped a screwdriver in a rack and basically blew out the entire rack. Like, so like I've been in situations where like no one is safe from this sort of stuff.
No. Yeah.
So the folks that are like, I want to have like complete redundancy. It's important to plan for it, but in all actuality, it's not going to happen because things. I think what the real value that you bring as a company, an organization, a cloud provider is like making sure that uptime is as small as possible. That's one. But even almost as important is making sure that you provide some sort of retrospective of what happened and learn from it. Because I do see this a lot, especially like in the data breach space. Like companies will like, oh, like we just leaked 4 million customers' credit card numbers. And they're like, sorry. And there's like no like reason for what happened. And it's like, that's wrong. That's bad. So like whenever I see like, and there's an outage or whatever, I always kind of pay attention. Like, okay, did this company, did they give us a reason why?
Right.
And I've seen, and most of them are very marketing based and very like legal based, like legal went through them 100 million times. But you can kind of tell like, oh, this was a DNS issue or this was a power issue or whatever. You can kind of tell that. And I think that's the biggest thing for a company to do is like be transparent as possible with your customers when these things happen. But to your point about like having 2 things in one cloud, sure. I mean, in practicality, you could do it. But I mean, what happens then if both clouds go down at the same time? You need a third cloud? You need a fourth cloud? Like, do you need to have a computer under someone's desk in case like all 16 clouds go down? Right? Like, when does it end? Right?
Yeah. Well, when you were saying that, it made me think of something that happens to me on Netflix. So every once in a while, and there was a period a year or 2 ago where this was happening a lot more than it does now. But every once in a while, I'll be watching an episode of one of my shows, and I'll go to the next one. Oh, we can't play it. Right? Okay, get out, come back in. Oh, can't play it. I go, what? Why can't you play this freaking episode? Right. And so in the case of the scenario of where, okay, maybe something's up with their, how are they provide those, those video files to customers, that would be an area where they could duplicate on a different cloud. Right.
Sure.
Like,
well, and not even on different clouds. Like, I think the biggest thing is like, I don't see very many situations where an entire cloud goes down. It's usually regions. Right. So like, if you like, that definitely is something that I recommend. Like almost every customer that has to worry about scale and global distribution needs to like, do you have your app or some instance of your app running, in major regions across the world, especially like if you're a global company, right? So that's more important than like the hybrid approach. Like, you need to have something that's in US West and Europe West and Asia East and whatever, right? Because if, for instance, one of these regions does go down or a service in one particular region goes down, it can fall back effectively. So that's the most important thing in my world, right? That's probably the most important. And you'll be surprised, like people don't even really realize that. Like, they're like, oh, I need to have like 5 versions of my app running. Like, yeah, you do.
You should.
For a lot of reasons. And one of them being like, if one of those regions goes down, like you definitely don't want to be in a situation where, Dave's trying to watch like Love is Blind on
Well,
on
I wouldn't be
Netflix.
watching that, number one, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, no,
A concert video, right? A concert
yeah,
thing.
exactly. Yeah, trying to watch something on Netflix, and all of a sudden it's not working. But honestly, in my experience, there's like so many layers, right? Like
Yeah.
you're a software engineer, so there's so many layers between like what's actually broken and what the user ends up seeing.
Right.
So like, if you see an error message on Netflix, is it a Netflix problem? Is it a data problem? Is it a cloud problem? Whatever. Like at the end of the day, the answer is yes, right? Because you're a customer and you're like,
it's their problem.
Right. I don't want to log in, log out of Netflix or whatever it is, right? So,
Right.
and these are the things that I think that we, especially now, and this is a different topic, but as we're starting to get down this path of like, what are developers actually bringing from a value perspective, right? Like it's that ability to think like this, right? Like we live in this world now where if I want to, I can go to ChatGPT and I can build like any app, right? Like to an extent, 80% of an app and then fill in the rest of it.
Yeah.
Like what does a developer actually do? Well, a developer has to fill in all the stuff that the language model doesn't have context of. So like, I have a lot of customers that are based in Singapore. So I need to make sure that I have adequate compute and good region coverage in the Singapore area of the world, right? Like these are things that cloud will never do for you, or a language model will never do for you, right? Yeah. So like, when people are like, it's gonna like AI is gonna take our jobs, like no, AI is going to take away a lot of the boilerplate of our jobs.
It's going to change it's going to make our jobs somewhat better, actually.
Yeah,
because
I mean,
we can stop focusing on the nitty gritty and focus on the solution to the problems, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like how many times have we solved the forms over data problem?
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, you talk to most developers that work in like line of business backend applications. It's I have some data source and I need to have a website or an app on top of it.
Right.
That's the job. Right. Yeah. And like,
how long does that take?
Yeah. I mean, forever,
from
depending
scratch.
on the, right. And like, if I could, and I think that's why a lot of folks are very keen on the idea of like the low code or no code approach, right?
Yeah.
I have some thoughts about that, but I think in general, like if I can take a lot of the boilerplate, like the nonsense that I'm going to have to like Stack Overflow search anyway, to like, like how do I do a link query that does a join and a group by and all this other nonsense, right? Here you go, right? Because I'm never going to remember that. Like I jokingly around, like I have to Google, like, how do I do a for loop in JavaScript? Like way too many times I've had to Google that, right? Like, so, I mean, the point I guess is like, it's about taking away the things that are frustrating for us or the things that slow down our ability to create and let us focus on the things that are interesting. And that's what I think AI can do. I know that was completely sidestepping a lot of the things we were just talking about, but like when we talk about like, what are we trying to accomplish as technologists? It's just that. Like, I want to be creative. Like, I think that there's a knock in our industry that like we're just a bunch of nerds and like all we want to do is sit at computers. Like, no, like some of us like to play guitar, some of us like to paint, some of us like to do all sorts of creative things. And I think writing code is a very creative process.
It is.
Like, how many times have you like I need to solve some problem, and after you write the code, you're like, yeah, that's good. And then you look at it in
satisfaction.
And then you look at it in 6 months and you're like, oh, that is not good.
Who wrote that?
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, look at Git blame. Oh, me. I'm just gonna move on. Anyway,
yeah. But that so my guest last week, he's in the Power, Power Platform team at Azure, right? So that's exactly what you're talking about, is the low code, no code. And you also reminded me of something about ASP.NET 2, right? So, we had two versions before .NET 2, right? ASP.NET 2. And because I used to teach at this at the university, is that one of the things that the Microsoft team did between version 1.1 and 2 was they took all the boilerplate stuff that we hate doing, but we have to do every single time we want to do a website, and that is how to log people in and out, how to provide components, how all this boilerplate stuff they provided as services in ASP.NET 2, right? And that to me was a huge difference in web programming way back then in early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
Because we had to stop doing that every single time, because that's the part that makes creating a website from scratch so long, is just doing the basic infrastructure to show anything. It's not easy.
Yeah, and I think I mean, I totally agree. Like, I have a talk that I do kind of, it does like a little bit of the history of ASP.NET. And I kind of talk about this like in, 2005 or whatever it was when ASP.NET came out. Like, and you think about like what was introduced in .NET 2, right? Generics. Like there was substantially more Web 2.0 like functionality, like jQuery or Ajax control kit was added in there.
Ajax.
Right. Right. Like, and now like that, I imagine that was for people that were, I guess, more traditionalist. It was very like, I don't like these things. And it's funny how history repeats itself, because then you see like .NET 6 with like minimal APIs, and people are like, I don't like this. Right. So it's
I like to write code.
Yeah, right. It's so funny. Like technologists were so fickle. We don't want to write code because some of the code we write is boilerplate and it's boring. But if you take away our ability to do it, we immediately get angry. It's like what are you going to do? Like if you're building a framework, like you're always going to lose. But I think the goal is to make the developer experience as streamlined as possible. Right. Because if I'm new, or if I come from a different programming stack and I'm like, oh, like Hello World has like 17 lines of code in it. Like that's a bummer. Right.
Why can't I do it in 3?
Or 1. Right. Like, I like that. And I think that's the thing that's the most exciting to me, especially about like the new, like modern, I could call it modern .NET, because I think just calling it .NET is somewhat troubling for a lot of folks. I call it modern .NET. So like 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever, is that the goal should always be to innovate and make it more accessible for people coming into the stack. Right. Because let's be honest, like you and me, like they're not gonna piss us off so much that we're gonna leave. Right. No, like we love .NET. We've built careers and livelihoods on top of .NET. Like we love it. We're not going to leave, more than likely. Right. But the people that are new, coming out of college, coming out of code camps, learning how to get started in technology, and if they're given all these options, JavaScript, Python, Go, right, and they see C Sharp, and they're like, I don't know about all this. Because I had a college professor that says Microsoft is the devil, right? Honestly, Microsoft's not the devil. We all love Microsoft. But like there's this, with older technologists that are, I guess, more Linux dependent, like Microsoft has some baggage, right? And I don't disagree, and I don't agree with any of that, but that's just where we live in. So if I'm getting started and I've heard bad things about company A, and I'm given all these options of like, what are some of the technologies that I want to learn? Like, and if .NET's not accessible to them, they're not going to build stuff on .NET. And then we have a problem because, eventually Dave probably wants to retire. Isaac wants to retire.
I do.
So, so like, who's going to fill those jobs?
Right. Yeah. I'm really curious about what's going to happen in the next 10 years in our career. It's going to be radically different 10 years from now, than it is now. That's for sure. Especially with AI and all that stuff.
I heard something very interesting. And I believe this is something that I can say publicly. If not, I'm probably no longer going to be an MVP. But I heard at the MVP summit that there's a 1 million job surplus. There's 1 million jobs that are empty in tech that need to be filled. Right.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah. So. And I was having a conversation. I don't know if you know Rocky Lockup. I was having a conversation.
I've known him since the 90s.
So I was having a conversation with Rocky, and I was like, I'm curious, like, what kind of jobs these jobs are, and if these are jobs that people getting into tech actually want. And then we had this whole conversation about that. And I think what I got out of it is that, we have to make sure that we're like technology is enticing or interesting for people that are coming into school. Because there is a lot of disruption. There's a lot of pain in being in technology, like there's a lot of working really, really hard to get to some outcome and then having to reinvent whatever. Right. So like we have to make sure that the jobs and the careers that we're building for new technologists are ones that are interesting. Like my first job out of college, I was on a team and I was building classic ASP applications and whatever, and it was fine. But there was other people that had just graduated college that their job out of college when they were in their 20s was maintaining COBOL apps.
Oh gosh.
Right. So like, I mean, if that's
Who
the
wants
kind
to
of
do
job,
that? Yeah.
especially if I'm in college and I'm learning Java or if I'm learning Ruby or whatever it is, and then my first job is like, oh, you're gonna build
COBOL.
mainframe, build mainframe apps. Like that's not an enticing job.
No, because
And these are
there's
the
not a future, right, in
well,
that, really.
but that's the problem though,
Yeah.
is that there is a future because these companies are not modernizing. So like you have
Well, I
somebody,
mean, there's a future in keeping it running, but there's not
yes,
like a
yeah. So
ongoing
like,
future with it.
you work in financial services and you've been, working at company A for 35 years, maintaining COBOL apps or Fortran apps or whatever, and then you retire. Someone has to do that work,
Yeah.
right? You can't just, okay, we're going to take this Fortran app and we're going to convert it to, JavaScript. That ain't going to happen like overnight,
No,
right?
it takes a very long time.
So you need to find somebody to do that job.
Yeah.
So like, do we try to find somebody out in the open market that knows Fortran, because that person is probably very expensive at this point.
Yes.
Or we can have one of our college hires work on it.
Oh, yeah. It's not going to be a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, so that's the thing that I'm thinking about. It's like, are the jobs that are available or the jobs that we're quote unquote creating or the jobs that are going to be opened up, are they interesting for people that are coming into technology? Because if they're not, people will probably find other job families to go into. Maybe they'll be more in the business side. Maybe they'll be business analysts or program managers or whatever, right? They're not going to be software engineers. That's what's.
And some people don't become software engineers because of culture too. And that really saddens me where, someone that really wants this career, their first or second job, they discover, at least in the positions they were in, how bad the culture is where they were. Right. And then that's it. They go do something else. And I feel bad. We lose resources that really want to do it because of stuff like that. But anyway, we got to go. I got 1 minute left and Simon's going to start being mad at me any second now. But that was a really great discussion. I definitely want to have you on because we only got to talk about like one thing. We didn't get to talk about
I'm easy. I'm easy. We can talk anytime you want.
So I'll definitely have you back on maybe later in the year. I definitely want to, because I think you're an interesting guest because you have been on both sides of this cloud thing. And I think you bring a really great perspective to the discussion.
And I promise next time I won't talk for 20 minutes about guitars.
No, that's my fault. Oh, Simon says there's a power outage at his place.
Oh.
So he's probably running it on his phone now.
Oh, great. Well, kudos to Simon for doing the hard work.
I know. He's a great producer. I can't ask for more, that's for sure. But the last question I ask everybody before they leave the first time they're on the show is what do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun? So I play guitar poorly. That's one thing. I'm of the kind of person that I have to like exercise or burn excess energy. So I exercise a lot. I go for runs or I get on the bike or I work out. But I think the biggest thing that I enjoy doing is spending time with my family. I got two small kids. I have a 5 and a 7-year-old.
Oh yeah, that's the best time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and that definitely keeps you. The cliche phrase is like kids keep you young, right? Like if I'm on the ground, like wrestling with kids, like that's where I get my most joy out of it.
I love playing with kids.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day too, like I like doing most of the stuff most of us in tech like to do. I like geeking out in technology or whatever. But and speaking with, and I think to your like similar to you as well. Like one of the biggest things I love to do that's work related is go out and speak out to the community. Right?
Yes, that's one of my favorite.
Nothing is better than like speaking to a group of people at a conference or speaking to a group of people on even virtually, right? Like just hearing what people are doing, hearing what people are excited about, because that's what drives me. Because honestly, my job is to get people excited about things. Right. But in order for me to get excited about things, I have to talk to people who are also excited about things.
Right. And you have to be excited about it too. I mean, And you can fake it to a point, but you really have to be excited about what you're doing, I think.
Totally true.
Well, I better let you go because we're already over time, and
No worries.
Simon's power's out, so who knows what's going on. But if you want to hang out and chat after the show, we can. But one thing I wanted to mention really quick.
I can keep going, by the way. Like, I don't have a hard stop. Like, I can
but
keep
Simon
talking.
does.
Oh, Simon does. Oh, that's right, because it's quite late.
But
quite late.
the show, it's like 12:30 at night there or something like that. And but when you were talking, I was thinking about, you know what? My very first guitar that I got, a long time ago, maybe I'll send it to you and your wife can do some paint porn on it.
Sure, yeah.
That'd be great.
If you think, like, I mean, so I will say, like, if you like, the texture of it is not like the feeling of a guitar that's like,
it's not smooth. It's probably
it's not smooth.
But it does
have it does have a little bit of like texture to it, but it's not bad. And like it's weird because it's like matte paint. So like, most guitars have like a glossier paint. So like it has like that kind of that feeling of like a more matte texture. And this is what the back looks like.
That's so beautiful. I mean, that's there's one of a kind. There's no other guitar that looks like it in the entire universe.
Yeah, right? It's true. I mean, honestly, if you're down, like, please send it up. I think my wife would be more than happy. She loves. I mean, she'll dip all sorts of random stuff in, like cups and different stuff. My wife, like, I joke that my wife is like the more handy of the two of us. Like, like, my garage has like a bunch of power tools in it, and like if friends come over, they're like, "Oh, so you do this?" I'm like, "No, all the tools in this garage is my wife." Like, my wife, I got her a sander for Christmas, I think last year. So like, I mean, I'm not, I guess, quote unquote, this is bad. I'm not very manly, I guess you could say, in the traditional sense, right? Like, I'm not keen on woodworking or anything like that, even though I'm kind of curious about it. I've just never done it. She, on the other hand, is like, she has like 40 different side hustles that she likes to do. But yeah, the paint pouring is the cool thing. And she also does vinyl printing too. So like, she'll make stickers or
you
t-shirts.
Call it paint pouring?
Yeah.
I thought you said it was paint porn.
No, paint porn too. Like, I mean, yeah.
Sorry, everybody. No. I didn't mean. I was thinking the wrong thing.
No, it's called paint pouring.
Paint pouring. Okay.
Yeah.
So I kind of like the other word better.
Yeah, paint porn's cool too. It's just acrylic paint, and you kind of mix it together and you swirl it into a pattern, and then you can pour it like physically like this, like out of a cup, or you can just dip items into it if you have like a larger container that you need to.
I'm gonna look that up on YouTube. It seems really interesting.
I mean, I will warn you, there's like, you can get down like YouTube hell for because there's so many cool things that you can do in this space. But it's I'm happy that the way it turned out. And again, the guitar doesn't sound great, but back to this stuff is art to me. Like, I had a friend who had I had like 10 guitars, and he's like, and because I mean, I'm not very good at guitar. So I was like, why do you need so many guitars? And he's like, because they're nice to look at. And I'm like,
I never buy a guitar because it's nice to look at. I buy it. I buy them because of the sound usually. Yeah. But
you can't play, like, I mean, over the course of a year, like how many hours do you play per guitar? I think that's the question, right? So if you have a ton of them, like you can play like one song, or maybe you have like one guitar that's always in a particular tuning or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, like, we all have like our staples. Like, this is the guitar that I go and pick up if I just want to just riff a little bit, right?
Right.
And then you have guitars that you might be less interested in. And then down the line, like, you have a guitar that you play maybe like 3 or 4 times a year, right?
Yeah.
If you have a lot of guitars.
I practice 5 hours a week minimally. And so I'm always playing my guitars. And out of all my guitars, there's 3 that I play the most, on a regular basis. The SG, which is worth a lot of money, I rarely play.
Because that's kind of like a collector's item, right?
Yeah, that's a collector's item. And but I gotta go. Simon's gonna get mad at me. So thanks so much for being on the show. I definitely want to have you back on again.
No worries.
And if you want to hang out afterwards, we can chat, because Simon will go to bed, and we can. Actually, I can't chat very long, but I can chat for a little bit.
Sure. Sounds good.
So thanks a lot for being on the show, Isaac.
No worries. Thank you, Dave. Bye.
So that was a great discussion that lasted kind of long, and I'm sorry about that. But I hate stopping things when we're in such a great discussion. I would have gone on for another hour if I could, but you know, Simon's got to go to bed and I've got to go to the store. So, so anyway, I have a new poll going on right now. I was working on some performance stuff from work, and I was wondering this question because someone was asking me this at work. And so I'm going to ask you. So I took the data from my code performance book and I sorted it basically on the top 4 collection types in .NET 7. Which one is the fastest collection type to loop through using for each, right? I gave you the top 4, the array, immutable array, list, and read-only span. And I'm asking you to pick which one of those do you think is the fastest one, and we'll see if you're correct next week. So I hope you go to there. There's the link for it. Please vote. So far, the results have been very interesting. I won't say why because I might tip the hand, but I think you'll be very surprised by the results next week. So anyway, I hope you go do that. Unfortunately, we still have to think about our friends in the Ukraine. I was just listening to some stories on the news this morning about that, and yeah, very sad. And so if there's any way you can support them, I hope that you can. And sorry about that. I hope that you can and you will, because we don't need this in the world right now anywhere, but especially here, because I want to go back. You all know that. Also, I hope you will help me help the kids in Delhi, India. Help me help the Voice of Slum that I raise money for. There's a bunch of ways on the screen. I'm not going to explain them all, but you know that these kids really need our support. We're software engineers. We can support them. You just got to get on the computer and do it. So find any way you can to help them with the Voice of Slum, and we'll be raising money for them at the Code Quality Conference in June. So I'm always going to find ways to support the Voice of Slum while I'm able to. So that'll be a long time, hopefully. All right, so that's the show. Sorry we went a little bit over. Next, on May 6th, we're going to have a couple weeks off. On May 6th, we'll be back, and we'll be talking about the business benefits of approaching application development with modular monoliths. That sounds like a mouthful, because it is, and that's why I have 2 guests coming on to talk to me about that. So I hope you join in on May 6th for that. As always, I'm going to encourage you to go donate blood. All of the blood banks in America, I know, are in a shortage right now. I was just at my blood bank last weekend donating, and they are in a shortage as usual. They always are, it seems like, but it's worse now for some reason. So I hope you will go down and help your fellow human by donating blood. And if you follow me on Twitter, this weekend I'm running a contest that if you do donate this weekend and next weekend or the weekend after that, I'm doing it 3 weeks in a row. If you donate and tweet to me proof that you're donating, and you have an address in the United States, I will send you my code performance book for just donating. How about that? All right, cool. And with that, thanks so much for watching the show. I hope you'll come back on May 6th to watch the next episode of Rockin the Code World with dotNetDave. See ya.